pulling up the wild lettuce. I'm going to cut it at the very bottom. You have to wait until it has buds on it or is blooming in order to get good strength out of the pain medication that I'm making out of it. My first tincture. It's hot and it's humid, but I went out this morning and got some wild lettuce. I am making a tincture for pain. And I've used it recently for body aches and it worked. This is an important part. If there's not enough water in the blender, it won't chop. That's the most water I've used, but I've had a hard time with this process. It just doesn't go down into the chopping blades. So this will all have to be cooked off in the end. So this is the start. The most important part of making this tincture is not to boil it. It has to be simmered. And because I added so much water, it's probably going to be simmering all day to thicken up. About an hour through the process, I have to take all the leaves out. I use cheesecloth, I squeeze out all the goodness, and then I put it back on the burner. My stove doesn't have low, really. I have to pile these burners, these little tray things on top of each other, and then put a cast iron skillet, and then put this in the cast iron skillet at the end, and it can simmer all day without boiling. This is what it looks like in the end. And I used this the last time I made this, and it was perfect all day. It simmered, steamed, but didn't boil. Processing tomatoes, and I have a cool trick. I cleaned and cooked these. I cleaned, cut them in half, and cooked them at 350. And I squeeze them and get the seeds out. And I put them in the pan, and the skin comes right off. Taking the seeds out makes them less acidic. I didn't do that my first year and a half of canning. My first year I only used salt when preserving. Now I use salt, lemon, and sugar, lemon juice. And I use a water bath. These have to cook, and this is the pain medicine, wild lettuce, still cooking. It needs to turn brown before I separate these particles from the liquid. Simple tools for canning. I have the new jars have been washed and they are boiling. So I'm going to use this and get the jars out, and I'm ready to put the tomatoes in. I had to use the tongs to get the jars out because they had fallen over. So the utensils that I use for canning are inexpensive and minimal. You can get more complicated. I just chose not to. These were the first tools I bought when I decided to try canning, and I also read a lot of recipes on Google. Close to the top. Put a tiny bit more juice in there. That's real close. one done. Then it'll go in a pot of boiling water, which I sterilize the jars in. I used 3 tablespoons of kosher salt, canning salt, 2 heaping tablespoons of brown sugar, and 2 to 3 tablespoons of lemon juice, freshly squeezed. Okay, that looks pretty close. There we go. This will pop and it will be sucked in right here when they're finished, and then you know that it's sealed. And these new jars and lids work so well that it's really easy. It's not complicated. Other than preparing it, I feel like it does itself. It takes a lot of tomatoes to fill a jar. I also freeze tomatoes in Ziploc baggies, quart size. Ooh, that one's kind of over a little bit. Tuck it in. If you're freezing them, you don't have to worry about salt or sugar, but you do have to peel them. You don't have to cook them either, which is probably better for you that way. So that's how much I have left. I think I need to find one more jar or cool it Ziploc baggie. Don't know yet. I have a few tomatoes. Half that pan fit in here because this is 2 days worth of work. So maybe I'll see if I can put the other half in here. This was what wouldn't fit in the pan. Wasn't sure what I was going to do with it, so I just set it aside. So I'm going to bring this back up to temperature and do at least one more jar, and then what's left can go in a Ziploc baggie. It'll be juicy. Good for stews. This is what the frozen tomatoes look like. I labeled this one wet so that I know if I need chunky tomatoes, not that one. That one will be for stew. I have one jar in there sterilizing. It's an old jar. I'll put a new lid on it. So the water's at least an inch or more above the rim of the jars. I do not have anything at the bottom of the pan because it didn't come with my original kit. The first year I used towels at the bottom, and then I stopped doing that. I've had no problems, nothing's broke. And I kind of like keeping it simple and using the tools I started with. Recipe changes slightly. This is starting to turn brown. That's when I can divide the liquids from the solids. And then I'll let it simmer down till most of the water is evaporated. And then what's left is the good juicy medicine from the wild lettuce. I did one more jar. Not much left. Just let it cool, and sometimes I'll put it in a small jar or baggie. I don't like wasting food. The reason I learned to do this is because I don't like wasting food. And I love not having to worry about tomatoes and pain medicine and tea because I've processed it. Herbs. So although I spend a lot of time working on my garden, enjoying my garden, filming my garden. It's beautiful. I love it, but now it's too hot to be outside enjoying it, and I'm reaping the benefits of the vegetable garden. This is as done as it's gonna get. It's been cooking for longer than it should. And it still looks really green, but I see hints of brown. It's really too hot to work with, but I'm gonna strain it through this cloth. I'm gonna dump it in and let it cool, and then I'll finish squeezing it out after it's cool. Okay, I'm going to use 2 hands and do some more squeezing, which means I'm going to put you down. This is what the finished product looks like. I don't have a lot of it. I've taken it 3 times, a teaspoon, for mostly body aches. You know, I don't know what's up with that. Fighting a bug. Virus. I don't think the extreme heat and overheating is going to cause body aches, but it did start out that way. This has a good shelf life. You don't really have to heat it up or seal it. It just needs a jar and a lid. And this is not as thick as the person that I learned this from, watching videos. This was thicker, but it doesn't need to be thicker to work. And the first batch I made, I used a strainer and some of the solids got through, so when I'm taking the medicine, it's chunkier than it should be. And I chase it with a piece of chocolate because it's gross. Yuck. But it works. I felt a lot better, and I'm happy to keep doing this. Tomatoes are out of the water. I did hear a pop. I believe it's this one. They make a noise when they seal, and they seal when they cool off, not in the bath. So there's no play. When I showed you before, there was play in the lid. Now there's no play, it's solid. Let's see, this one's solid too. Yep, none of them have any play left in them. I ended up finding a little jar for what was left in the pan. Sometimes I need just a little bit for a stir fry or something, so it'll be just right for something.